So you can hear that a lot of the traits that he used in the films were already there in his music before he got on Dr. No. Now, the score for Dr. No was written by Monty Norman. But when it came to a theme, they had a problem finding one that they liked. So, and I want to point out that throughout this music, you will hear traits that are very reoccurring. He loves low unison flutes, harp, mallets, brass stabs, repeated motives with adding layers, and bass trombone on 2 and 4. That's a big thing. Now, I'm going to be playing some music that I call beauty music later. John Barry got Oscars for scores, but these were very different scores for him. These were. When he went on and did Born Free, or Somewhere in Time, or Out of Africa, he was very known for doing really, really long melodies and really rich chords and really expansive music. You don't really have that in the Bond films. This was really early on. This is where he started. So, harmonically, Oddjob's leitmotif consists of a single sustained minor major 7 chord, a chord Bernard Herrmann made frequent use of in his Hitchcock scores, and film and music scholar Royal S. Brown dubbed as Herrmann's Hitchcock chord. With Oddjob, the chord is consistently C, E flat, G, and B, or C minor major 7. Further, Oddjob's major minor 7th chord is actually contained within the opening chordal blast of the James Bond theme. The first chord of that theme is a major minor 7 with a 9 added, or E, G, B, D sharp, F sharp. What could well be called the James Bond chord, since it memorably ends the theme on the electric guitar. Oddjob's chord then can be formed by taking the first 4 notes of the James Bond chord transposed to C. If you look on the next page, you'll see the chords right next to each other. The Bond chord transposed to C, and then Oddjob's chord. When Oddjob is loading the clubs into Goldfinger's trunk, you hear both. Okay? Now, here is the first example of how John Barry builds long cues. And basically, he comes up with motives, short material, then repeats them with added layers and builds them over time, and perhaps adding some other material as it goes. And this is one of the most famous scenes from the Bond films. This time, the opening uses the piccolo, a different guitar sound, and a slower tempo. This is the fascinating part. In the pre-title, the entire sequence is built over the material of 4-bar phrase below, based on 4 chords: F minor, B flat minor, F sharp minor, and B flat minor, and the melody below. Barry seemed adamant to retain more of the established musical style of the Bond films than he was allowed. The best example being the moon buggy chase, for which he actually wrote a dramatic cue in the manner of previous Bond films. But since the scene begins with the filming of a falsified moon landing, a joke that refers to conspiracy theories about the 1969 American moon landing being a fraud, the filmmakers believed a more comical type of music would be more appropriate. It starts with a variation on the mud music, then only strings and xylo, but it ends with a variation on the mud music. But Barry was not happy, and I believe he gave them the minimum he could. And you can see if you disagree with this. The reason Sir George Martin scored the film, he was really good friends with everybody involved in the film, and they had spent all their money paying Paul McCartney to do the theme. So they didn't have enough money left to hire a composer for the scores, so Sir George Martin did it. The next film that he did was Moonraker, and that was in 1979. Now for Moonraker, Barry had the idea of writing an 8-movement symphonic suite from which the film's score could be drawn. He hoped to turn it into a 2 LP set like the successful Star Wars album. This, however, never happened. Second, this is fascinating to me. 3 singers were approached to sing the title song: Frank Sinatra, Johnny Mathis, and Kate Bush, before Shirley Bassey signed on at the last minute. So she definitely has the record of singing the most James Bond themes. Third, the song's original lyrics by Paul Williams were ousted at a late stage in favor of new lyrics by Hal David. Finally, Barry was never happy with the way the music was used in the film, feeling that his contributions had been marginalized. Nevertheless, Barry's music for the film remains highly regarded Bond score, in part because of Barry's subtle shift towards more symphonic style, whose initial impulses in his Bond scores can be heard in The Man with the Golden Gun, and which became fully developed in the scores for Out of Africa and Dances with Wolves. both of which won him an Oscar. More noticeable, however, is the effect of two strong new influences: an increased focus on sound effects due to the introduction of Dolby Stereo in what may be called the Star Wars Revolution, and the lighter, more comedic style of the Roger Moore Bond films. At the same time, the adherence to some of the techniques of Bond's previous Bond scores ensured that the sound of Moonraker would be readily identifiable as a Bond score. Its milder version with strings on the melody of the tune, trumpets only on the second half of the line of the gun barrel sequence. The Bond theme starts to undergo developments that had been previously not been part of Bond's vocabulary. When Bond finds and investigates the glass shop in Venice, which you won't see, over top of the Bond accompaniment, we hear fragments of the theme's B section and end of the guitar riff that are transformed into enough in its tempo and instrumentation that one may not consciously recognize them as the Bond theme, even if their emotional qualities of mystery and wary confidence are fully perceived. Compare the two excerpts from the original Bond theme with Barry's developments in Moonraker. So you can listen.